Good morning and welcome to today's webcast, Cybersecurity Threats to the Aerospace and Defense Industry. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts to help companies and individuals conquer challenges as they plan for what's next. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget to the right of the slide view. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window below the slide view and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of the polling questions, which we'll ask throughout today's presentation. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget to open a PDF file that you can save to your computer. Don't worry if you can't download your PDF certificate today. We'll email a copy to you in 2 weeks. If you're attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our attendance sheet to receive CPE credit. The attendance sheet is available in the slide deck and handouts widget. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. Also note that CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and isn't available to participants who view the on-demand version. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see isn't legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And I'm pleased to introduce today's presenters from Moss Adams, Mark Edwards, Senior Director of Cybersecurity, and Francis Tam, Partner in our Cybersecurity practice. And Francis, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Thank you very much, Emily. Welcome everybody for signing on to our webcast today. So today's topic is on cybersecurity threats to aerospace and defense industry. As you can imagine, cybersecurity has been a big topic for all of us for the past few years now. You know, you see all kind of updates, news in the on the TV, on newspaper, on websites, whatever. So there are a lot of things that are happening in our world. Now, this is very much focused on the aerospace industry because, as you can imagine, aerospace and defense industry has a lot of trade secrets, has a lot of very sensitive information. So today, the goals of our the agenda that we have is we want to introduce some goals that you want to achieve in information security, and then Mark will go over these things and why is A&D, aerospace and defense industry, targeted, and then who is the responsible party for this? What are the latest top breaches and exploits that maybe you haven't paid attention to? What has been stolen? And then, maybe at a high level, how can you reduce some of the risk? Then we'll go over some of the more prevalent standards, NIST 800-171, which is a extension of 800-53, and then the latest one, NAS 9933, which was released in December of 2018. With that, we'll go to the first polling question. Emily?
All right, our first polling question. Does your business have a dedicated resource for cybersecurity? And your options are yes, we have a Chief Information Security Officer or Director level resource in charge. Yes, we have a manager level in charge. No, our business is not large enough to require dedicated resources. Or I don't know. I'll give everyone a few moments to respond. To participate in our polls today, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit Submit. I'll give everyone a few more seconds. And let's take a look at the results. And I'll turn it over to Mark to continue.
Great. Thank you, Emily. Mark Edwards here. And let's see. So, I'm happy to see this. So 37 and 25% at least have a CISO, a director, or a manager in charge. That's great. But about another 1/3 do not. And so as we get through this presentation here, that this is one of the areas that I strongly recommend in order to help reduce the risk of information security breaches. So thank you for those answers there. We're going to go ahead and jump into this. So understanding that many of you on the webinar today are not in the information security profession like myself and Francis are, I always like to just baseline and set the expectation. What are we trying to achieve in information security? So first and foremost, our roles are to protect information and information systems from unauthorized, and the key word here is unauthorized. Unauthorized access, unauthorized use, disclosure, disruption, modification, or the destruction of information or information systems in order to provide confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So the CIA, as we like to call it, is not the three-letter agency of the United States government. It stands for confidentiality, meaning that authorized users should be the only ones that have access to confidential information, sensitive information, classified information. The integrity part is that only authorized individuals should be able to make modifications to that data. And availability means authorized individuals or groups should have access to the data when they want to have access to the data. So some examples, confidentiality would be an information security breach. So a threat actor gets the data and does what they want to do with it. Integrity is being able to deface a website, for example, changing of the data by unauthorized individuals. And availability, ransomware, which actually has been plaguing the A&D industry, so CIA. So why is aerospace and defense targeted? As we go through these, it predominantly is because your industry has access to very sensitive information, trade secrets, it's in the name of national defense, and this is very, very valuable, unfortunately, to some unfriendly nation states that we happen to have to coexist with. So they, meaning the threat actors, are very interested in stealing intellectual property. They want to be able to advance their own domestic aerospace and defense capabilities. In particular, they're looking at unmanned aerial vehicles, directed energy programs, and certainly we've all been hearing about the hypersonic weapons that are being developed. They want to be able to develop countermeasures. So if they steal the actual plans or understand what our systems are, they can develop countermeasures in times of war. They want to be able to produce technologies that potentially could be put up for sale on the global arms market. This is a key one here, collect intelligence to possibly infiltrate or subvert our systems that we are developing. So if they're able to steal access to our systems and we've got some vulnerabilities or bugs or backdoors, for example, then the threat actors would be able potentially to infiltrate or subvert our capabilities, and we don't even know that they can do that. There's also, they are targeting the third-party supply chain, of which I assume many on this call here are a part of. So this is an area where the threat actors are targeting. It's kind of the weakest link in the chain, as they like to say. So the larger players certainly have had their share of breaches, and we're going to go over a few of those. But some of the more mid-size or smaller defense A&D providers may not have as robust of the prevention and detection capabilities, and so therefore, if they could be breached, and they've got connections to the larger, then it's a cascading event that can create some really big problems. And I've got an example or two of that happening. Last but not least is economic advantage. So there is some commercial espionage going on, but predominantly we're more worried about the nation-state capabilities. So speaking of that, who are these groups that are targeting aerospace and defense? So a quick definition here, you may have heard of the term APT, and that stands for Advanced Persistent Threat. This was a term that was coined, first time I saw it was probably 6-7 years ago. And an APT is a group or a team that's working in association with a nation state. And a nation state, think of it as a country. And so we won't name countries on this webinar, but there's a few that we are in deep competition with in terms of armed superiority and military superiority. And these are APTs that are very well funded, have some of the best and brightest minds in the entire world, and they are the ones focused on trying to break into A&T businesses, unfortunately. So the best and the brightest are targeting our group here. Also associated with nation states or nation state militaries as well as intelligence groups. So these are yet additional sets of teams, extremely well funded, extremely bright and intelligent individuals that have clear goals, they have large budgets, and they got plenty of time to meet their goals and their objectives. There is, to a lesser extent, domestic and international commercial competitors, such as industrial espionage, as I had mentioned. Less so domestic, more international. And then you always need to be aware of rogue employees. So unfortunately, A&D, I couldn't get good statistics, but there are some other industries where the insider threat actually is larger than the external threat. I can't say that's true for A&D. I don't have, as I mentioned, good statistics, but we need to be mindful of rogue employees. And we've got some recommendations at the end to help mitigate that risk. So now we're up to our next polling question. Emily, please.
All right, our second polling question, why is the aerospace and defense industry targeted? And your options are to develop military countermeasures, gain military advantage, reduce R&D cycles to develop comparable technologies, all of the above, or I don't know. And as a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE credit for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. We are on our second question here. I'll give everyone about 5 more seconds to respond here. And let's go ahead and take a look at the results. Mark, back to you.
Oh, great. You guys are actually paying attention to me. Thank you, everybody. The correct answer is all the above. Develop military countermeasures. I tried to get a little sneaky with you all, tried to change some of the terminology here, but develop military countermeasures, absolutely. Gain military advantage, absolutely. Reduce the R&D cycles to develop comparable technologies, and I have a slide that I'll cover here shortly to demonstrate exactly what I mean by that. And it is all the above. And the fact that you don't know, that's okay. So hopefully over the next couple of slides, we'll provide you some education here. So we're going to keep moving forward. So let's talk about not A&D. I'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about some of the largest data breaches of the 21st century. And the source of this is highlighted at the bottom. But let's first start on the bullets on the right-hand side. So in the first half of 2018, and I don't yet have the full 2018 numbers, but in the first half, 4.5 billion records were exposed. Exposed meaning lost. And last time I checked with Google, there's 7.5 billion in the entire world as of 2017. So more than half of the world's population have had their records exposed. Really unprecedented. In 2019, already in the first 3 months, 2.7 billion identity records were posted for sale on the dark web. And for those of you that aren't aware of it, you've got the www, or the internet, as we all know it and as we all use it. In fact, you used it to get into this webinar today. But that's only about 10% of the actual web itself. There's a thing known as the deep web and the dark web. So we've got folks that live in that space and take on personas and make pretend they're bad guys, and they're able to see what's down there. And they have discovered 774 million unique email addresses and 21 million unique passwords. These are for sale. By the way, you may want to jot down this the next one here. You can check to see whether your email has been compromised and is on the dark web. So haveibeenpawned.com. Much, unfortunately, to my surprise, I shouldn't say surprise, 3 of my 4 personal emails have been compromised. And a quick piece of advice, always make sure you have strong passwords on your emails and never use the same password for your various different emails, whether it's Google, Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, etc. All right, that being said, largest data breaches. So Marriott, the numbers seem to be settling in at about 383 million. And because I'm in this business and my unending goal is to make sure that my clients do not get compromised. Thankfully, none of these were my clients. But I am customers of a lot of these clients. So Marriott, yep, I was part of that. Equifax, that was a big breach because of the type of sensitive information that was exposed. So security numbers, driver license number, your credit history, credit rating, credit cards you have. Really, really painful. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Equifax. Adult Friend Finder, 412 million records. Anthem, unfortunately, I was a part of that as well, so my health records are out there. eBay, 145 million. JP Morgan Chase in 2014 was a big wake-up call. The banking industry in particular spends a much higher percentage of their budget to defend against threat actors. And when they were breached in 2014, they already had 500 people on staff, 500 dedicated information security or cybersecurity experts. And after that breach, they doubled it to 1,000. I don't know what the number is today, but it gives you just a sense of how many people are dedicated in our largest banks in the U.S., and they can still get breached. Home Depot, I got a new credit card for that, $56 million. Yahoo, when I check, have I been pawned? Yep, my Yahoo account's down there. Target stores, yep, got a new credit card. And the last two are specific to A&D, and I'll talk more about those. The U.S. Office of Personnel Management, which was 2012, and the RSA Security, which was really the beginning of some of the problems that occurred in 2011. So I'll elaborate more on those in just a moment. So how much data is actually lost? Quite a bit. 46 records every second. May not sound like too bad, but it's about 4 million every day. Just unprecedented amount of data is being leaked and stolen, put into large databases by unfriendly nation states to someday use that against us as individuals. So let's talk about the A&D breaches and exploits. This is what we really care about. As I mentioned, RSA in 2011 was breached. It's not so much that they were breached as much as what was taken. And for anybody that on the call that is familiar with two-factor authentication, hopefully everyone has in their lifetime and probably hopefully uses it even today, will have some sort of either a key fob or a software token where when you log into sensitive systems, whether it's email, your VPN, or some other types of platforms within your business or businesses, will require an additional challenge. So two-factor is typically a password is something you know, an ID and a password something you know, whereas a token number is something that you have. The third and final is biometrics, which is something that you are. So the three types of challenges are something you know, something you have, something you are. The two-factor hits two of those three, and it makes it much more difficult for threat actors to break into systems. So strongly recommend that on my final slide. What happened was the C tokens were stolen, which then, and it's been confirmed, Lockheed Martin and EMC were then subsequently compromised shortly thereafter. It was confirmed that because the RSA Secure ID tokens had been copied, that threat actors were able then to break into Lockheed and EMC and steal very sensitive information. It is unconfirmed but highly suspected that General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon were also subsequently breached after RSA as a result of these C tokens. Boeing was subjected in 2018 to a very large ransomware, and they did pay it. Their production line went down for about a couple of days to a week from what I read, and we're going to talk about ransomware also a little bit later here. And then the next one, it really, really hurt, unfortunately, the Office of Personnel Management, and anyone, hopefully many of you on this call in the A&D industry either hold security clearances or previously had security clearances. We, and I previously did as well, we all need to fill out Form 86, and the Form 86s were stolen. 21.5 million records, of which 5.6 million fingerprints. This really hurts. That is in the possession of an unfriendly nation state, which can be used as leverage, can be used to recruit spies, can be used as taking families as hostages. It's unfortunately, it's so dark and so clandestine and so secretive that I can't get any statistics on how bad that hurt. But it is without question one of the most painful breaches that occurred, right up there with the NSA breach that occurred after this one. Honeywell lost 19,000 PII employee information. PII was not defined earlier. It's personally identifiable information, or PII, things like social security numbers, driver license number, where you live, your phone number, those types of things. Not good. That was one of the defense subsidiaries of Honeywell. So hey, what Mark, is going on? Yes.
Mark, chime in on this one, because I think this is a very good point that you brought up of some of these. Is if you notice some of these breaches that happened in the past, a lot of them, they disclose why they happened, but of course, many of them, they didn't even disclose how and why they happened. But a lot of them, for example, if you go back one slide.
Yes.
So the RSA token and Lockheed thing, I think this is what I call good IT hygiene is not practiced. So the RSA token has already been authenticated, and yet they did not expire it or renew it in a timely manner. So that's how these people got in. So I think in a way, you will see that when I present the framework later on about 800-171. Some of these things is what the regulations are asking people to do is practice good IT hygiene, adopt some of the best practices. Many of these could be avoided if you do these things. But if you don't, it may or may not happen, but then you allow an easy way for people to get in and out and take your information. So I think this is where the gist of some of these breaches, hopefully we learn from them and then practice good IT hygiene. Back to you, Mark.
Francis, excellent point. In fact, RSA, when the breach occurred, they did send out messages. I think at the time there were over 1 million RSA tokens that were in use, secure ID tokens specifically that were in use at the time, and they immediately recommended anybody using them that they essentially, trade them in for fresh tokens. Clearly, many did not, and hence this cascading effect of Lockheed, General Dynamics, Bell, Northrop, and Raytheon. Great point. Thank you. So continuing to move forward, because I know, Francis, you have a lot that you need to chat about as well, so I'll keep moving through my slides here. The A&D threat activity. So there's a company called FireEye, well-respected company out there, and MITRE is a nonprofit government entity. They've identified several APTs. Again, APTs are advanced persistent threats, and these APT groups are targeting the following A&D subsectors. So anyone on this call who happened to fall into one of these subsectors, unfortunately, they're targeting you, right? There is a crosshair on your company. So just please be aware. So A&D parts wholesalers, and then a whole bunch of folks that are in the manufacturing area, manufacturing aerospace products and parts, manufacture aircraft engine and parts, guided missile and space vehicle systems and subsystems, and then the industrial and military computer systems. So these areas in particular were identified in a 2018 paper or papers saying that these are absolutely being targeted as we speak. And so if you fall into any of these, just be aware that the threat actors are targeting your industry, your business. So what has been stolen so far? And these are in no particular order, but this is all bad, and some are worse than others, but it's all bad. So proprietary product or service information. So oftentimes sensitive, confidential. There's various levels of classification, whether it's secret, top secret, compartmentized. Some really, unfortunately, some really sensitive information has gotten out there. Testing results of our systems that are being built here in the U.S. and the reports on those test results, product designs and blueprints, production processes. How do you produce, these systems? Equipment maintenance records and specifications, business communications, and that may seem not too important, but that ties in directly to the last bullet, organization charts and company directories. So by business communications, you can see who's sending the note, who's in charge, who's the boss, who's got the authority. Again, it's all about building the organization chart and understanding who you can target for phishing attacks and other types of social attacks. All right, so budget information on those. Personally identifiable information I had mentioned before, research reports, system log files. All right. So we're getting here towards the end. I was hinting that there was a direct result of several of our RSA-related breaches, or the RSA breach that then resulted in multiple downstream breaches. And there's no surprise for all of us in the A&D complex that the J31 looks and performs and has similar specifications as the F-35. F-35 is the most expensive program in the United States history. And for a couple of stolen blueprints and some other, sloppiness that happened in the U.S., we've got a pretty comparable competition in the J31. J31 is hands above much better than the J21. So I'll just leave it at that. This is what happens, and it's very, very disturbing, and this is a matter of national security for all of us. So what can be done? So again, these are not in any particular order, but these are all generally make a lot of sense, and I'll talk about each one a little bit more. Designated security expert to lead cybersecurity. Thankfully, 2/3 of those on the call that did respond to the polling question number one, 2/3 already have either a manager, director, or a CISO. Excellent. For those of you that do not, the 1/3, I'm hoping that you're in a position to have some discussions with your leadership to try to get somebody in that role. Very important. Have somebody leading that activity. This one sounds, the second bullet, sounds so ridiculous, but it's amazing that some clients do not know where their sensitive data resides. This is called the data-centric approach. Know where your data exists, know where it lives, know who has access to it, and then start building concentric rings around that data so that you can prevent, and if you can't prevent, then you must detect. Then you need to be able to respond, and that follows the NIST framework. Prevent, detect, respond. So know where your data resides. Know your threats and focus on safeguarding targeted data. Hopefully these couple of slides gave you some idea. Again, these are large, well-funded nation states working through APT groups. Develop and enforce cybersecurity policies and procedures. Most companies have policies and procedures. If you don't, they need to be built. And if you have them built, make sure that you're following them and enforcing them. Implement two-factor authentication. We discussed that. It's remarkable how effective that simple technology is, and the cost of two-factor has come down tremendously over the years. So make sure you have two-factor authentication in place. This one sounds fundamental, but and I'm hoping you're all doing it, but unfortunately a lot of clients don't. Use strong passwords and change every 90 days at a minimum. Yep, I know it creates friction and nobody wants to do it, but it is when systems are stolen or data is stolen and it's got your user ID and password, by rotating through every 90 days and changing it, you then effectively the password that was stolen is now no longer valid. That's one of the reasons why resetting passwords frequently is a great deterrent. It's a great mitigation for future breaches. One more thing about passwords. Longer is better than more complex. And what I mean by that, the current standard is eight characters long, uppercase, lowercase, special character, and a number. 3 of those four attributes should be in your passwords today. However, a 16-character passphrase is harder to crack than an 8-character that's complex. So keep that in mind. There's a formula that we use to calculate how many unique combinations there are, and longer is better than shorter for obvious reasons, I hope. The next one is very, very important. Make sure you have a strong patch management program. So the Equifax breach that occurred was directly related to not patching a 0-day, that actually a patch had been created, and Equifax unfortunately got a little sloppy and a little lazy, and they chose to patch at their next available cycle, whatever that was. And so that vulnerability in their web servers were exploited, and then, as they say, the rest is history, 143 million records. Provide annual training to employees. This is particularly helpful for the next one as well, anti-phishing technology. So still close to 50% or more than 50% of all of the documented breaches can be traced back to social engineering, and in particular, phishing. So they're doing they've gotten really good. Now they're doing spear phishing. They'll go onto Facebook. They'll go onto Twitter. They'll learn more about who the individuals are, and then they will write very, very convincing emails that even experts like Francis and myself, can sometimes look at it and cross our eyes and say, man, that's really good. But training can help them understand and recognize those types of threats. So very, very important. And there is some very good technology out there that's much less expensive than it used to be. This one, it's amazing how many businesses don't do this. Encrypt sensitive data when it's in motion, which we almost all do these days, but also while it's at rest. If it's data that is constantly moving very quickly, I acknowledge that encrypting it at rest is very difficult. Some of the financial industries, can't do that. But if your data tends to be more static and sitting in large repositories, really consider encrypting it at rest. And then finally, you need to have some monitoring and logging capabilities going on. So monitor and log your network and your databases. That will help you discover suspicious activities from which you then can respond appropriately quickly, and then cardone off the threat, clean the systems, and then get yourself back online again. So with all of that, I believe we are up to the next polling question here. There we go, Emily.
All right. Our next polling question, who do you think is principally targeting the aerospace and defense industry? And your options are hacktivists, organized criminal groups seeking immediate profit, well-funded nation states, all of the above, or I don't know. And for those of you that would like a copy of today's slide deck, you can download them now from the folder that says Slide Deck and Handouts to the right of the slide view. We'll also be sending the slides via email after the webcast. I'll give everyone a few more seconds here. And let's go ahead and take a look at the results. And Francis, I think we're turning it back to you.
Great. Wow. So it's all of the above. So I think a lot of folks are very much well aware of what kind of risks we are facing here. So now that Mark has talked about a lot of the statistics, a lot of the backdrop about this area, I am going to go probably into more what I call more dry and boring area. This is the framework, security framework that we have, 800-171. It has been around for a while. It's I call it dry and boring because when I talk about technology, if you talk about maybe retail industry, maybe banking industry, a lot of those industries, the main number one goal is to make it about consumer experience. How do you make it fast? How do you make it, people can see all the information they need to make a decision quickly? Security is not necessarily at the top of the list. On the other hand, in the A&D industry, as you can imagine, your goal is not to make it a very, very easy consumer experience, very, information readily available for everybody. No, security is number one. So in this case, we don't need to, in some cases, the latest and greatest cutting-edge technology, but your number one goal is to make sure how you can safeguard and protect the information you're getting from the federal government. So that's the difference here. And by the way, when we look at the attendees list, we have all kind of people on this call and this webcast. We have CFO type, we have the CIO type, we have the CISO type. So hopefully everybody has some takeaway from this webcast. In this area, what I'm going to talk about, there may be some terminology. I'll try to elaborate as much as I can. There may be some technical terms. There may be some other IT terms that we use, and I assume people would know. But if you don't, you can send in a question, and we can answer that as much as we can. So hopefully you have some takeaway, and this is one of those guidance that, is pretty prevalent, is pretty common among the A&D industry as well as some of the vendors that are working for the federal government. So this has been around since 2015. Over the years, there are some updates. It initially is stemming from the FISMA, Federal Information Security Modernization Act. So if you have done any kind of FISMA audit or a NIST 800-53 audit, FIPS 200, you will know what I'm talking about here. So with that FISMA, it requires any federal agencies to identify and provide information security protections when they collect information on behalf of an agency or the federal government in this case, information used or operated by an agency or by a contractor. So this is directly related to any federal agencies. But one of the requirements, as you can imagine, if the federal agencies are required to protect the information, well, what if they use a third party? Sometimes these third parties could be the folks here on the call. You are a manufacturer, you are a vendor working for one of the federal agencies. How are you going to protect that information that you get from these federal agencies? So this is where the 800-171 will come in. So many of you folks, you're the contractors, you're the manufacturers for federal agency, and your basic and your routine business interactions with the federal agencies, you process, store, or transmit sensitive federal information. In this case, there's some examples there: credit cards, web and electronic mail services, whatever, right? But in most cases, a lot of them could be sensitive trade secrets, weapon information, what Mark talked about earlier. And a lot of this information is shared by not only with, manufacturers and vendors. They could be very much universities or state governments or whatnot. So this entire 800-171 they want to lump them all together. When you come in contact with any I'll move on to the next slide here. CUI, Control Unclassified Information. Control unclassified information is maybe this information is not classified, but is controlled. So if you come in contact with it because of your interaction with federal agencies and because of you doing something with the federal government, you are obligated to protect it. So that's why we have this 800-171. In a nutshell, over the years, there are some updates. As of the latest update, there are 110 controls, and they are organized into 14 families in this slide here. The 14 families are, I'm not going to read it line by line. I'm going to go through these families and hopefully give you an idea what these families are about. You know, they are talking about different things, and basically, I would call it give you a better framework, a more organized manner to look at some of the good IT hygiene you should follow. Some of them Mark talked about earlier in a very high level, but these 14 families, these 110 controls give you a very, very thorough explanation why they're needed and da-da-da-da-da. So I'll talk about that. One of the things about this 800-171 and the NAS 9933, which I will talk about in a few slides, the beauty and ugliness of it is you don't have to comply with all of them, okay? You may have to comply with 80%, 90% of it before you will be selected as a vendor that can provide the federal services. It's not mandatory right now that you comply with all of them, but you must have a security plan and a plan how you're going to remediate the rest if they are not satisfactory. Okay. So the other thing is about the 800-171. If let's say you have done some other security framework compliance audits or whatnot, for example, FedRAMP. If you have done one of these, you may say, well, I've done that. It does mean that you're automatically in compliance with 800-171? Yes and no. They're not 100% overlapping, but there are a lot of controls, as you can imagine, they are common to both. So if you have already done FedRAMP, for example, you have a very, very good chance that you're already in compliance with the NIST 800-171. So that's one thing you may want to be aware of. So going to 3.1, I call it, again, I'll only go over the classes, the 14 classes. I'm not going to go through, for example, 3.1. There are 22 controls. I only copy and paste 10 of them here from the pronouncement. I'm not going to read through every one of them, but I'll explain and kind of go over what each class is about. So one thing that I don't like, I guess me personally, when I look at these things is they have an emphasis of maybe network security, maybe on certain things. But one thing when you do this assessment, you have to be aware of the environment that you're housing, you're touching sensitive information. And maybe in a network layer, maybe you have a database, maybe you have a third-party cloud provider, maybe you have an application, whatever you may have. So you need to apply all of these to all these layers, all these IT components, but not just the network security, not just one layer. So I think this is something they didn't make very clear in this 800-171. The other thing that I don't like is they don't have a big emphasis on third parties. As you can imagine lately, in the last few years, a lot of folks are using cloud providers. Maybe software as a solution, maybe infrastructure as a solution, maybe platform as a solution. So some of these folks they are reselling fourth-party, fifth-party products. So when you look at these things, if you're looking at your third parties, again, they didn't even say how you're going to look at third parties, right? When you apply that to the third parties, you must kind of look and see, are they using somebody else? Is there a fourth party involved, a fifth party involved, and that kind of stuff. So that would be, my quick 2 cents about what I don't like about the 800-171. So on the access control, by the way, on this NIST 800-171, in June of 2018, NIST has released an assessing guide in June of 2018. So basically, they took the 110 controls. They have a guide that you can download, free of charge, that will explain what these controls about, what kind of examination procedures you need to perform potentially, not always 100% inclusive. You want to, maybe some of them are not applicable, but you may want to add some to it. What is the group of the people you potentially need to interview? What kind of test procedures you need to potentially perform? So if you want to do this on your own, please download it and take a look at this assessing Security Requirements for Control and Classified Information Guide, and that's from June of 2018. So access control, as you can imagine in this group here, we're talking about how you control the access for this kind of information that is protected. And I'll give you some highlights. I'm kind of scrolling down here. By the way, I'm looking at a guy, the NIST 800-171. They did a mapping of the 800-171 with the 800-53 and then the ISO 2701. Like I said earlier, a lot of these frameworks are very much in common. There are a lot of controls that are, they're asking for the same thing. If you do one, you might have already complied with a lot of these already. So feel free to take a look at that. You don't have to duplicate everything that you might have done in the past. So in 3.1, this is probably the most important class of the 14, in my opinion. So you look at account management, you look at access enforcement, you look at remote access. So, access account management, for example, you want to make sure you have a good provisioning practice, how you bring people on, what kind of rights do you give them, revealed access rights in a periodic manner. When do you need to remove the access? You have to do it in a timely manner, of course, right? Access enforcement, what do you want to give people in terms of the utilities, in terms of the access network components, that kind of thing. Remote access, as you can imagine, these days, not only we're talking about Wi-Fi, we're talking about mobile devices, teleworking, remote protocols, you name it, we have it, right? IoTs, all the things. How do you control that? We are talking about information flow enforcement. You need to have a good policy in controlling, enforcing how some of the data flow. Segregation of networks, segmenting is one of them, right? Segregation of duties. You don't want to vest one or two particular individuals with conflicting rights. If you do, you are, waiting for something to happen. You want to make sure you assign rights with the least privilege concept. You only want to give people the least minimum rights to do the job. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay. Session log. Again, there are a lot of there are 22 controls within 3.1 already. Mobile devices. So if you are allowing people to access information on mobile devices, maybe you need to look at mobile device management, MAM, mobile application management, to make sure you control that access. So moving on. 3.2. So awareness and training. This is, again, very important because I think, Mark, you mentioned it before. People, right? How do you educate people to spot, for example, phishing attempts? That is very, very important these days because we have seen all kinds of phishing attempts these days. Role-based security training. How do they use their roles to access information, control information, disseminate information based on what they need to do? So that's very important. Moving on to 3.3 very quickly. Audit and accountability. So this is the area where you need to make sure you have enough logging capability, capturing events that are abnormal. What do you do with these abnormal activities? What are you going to do about it? How do you follow up? Do you have the capability to generate on-demand records if you have something happen? So, a lot of times I think I heard when you have a state-sponsor breach, you have about 19 minutes to react. If you take more than 19 minutes, game over. So you must have that kind of mechanism in place to make sure that you monitor that. And then what are you going to do about this? You must have on-demand information in a timely manner. Timestamps, that's key. This is, again, I've seen it all the time in, for example, PCI, Payment Card Industry Standards. You have to have a mechanism to make sure that you synchronize the clocks, because that's one of the first things that the hackers will do. They will play with the time clock and your internal time clock to make sure they can hide the tracks, right? Protect the audit information. So even if you have all the good logs and audit trails in place, if anybody can modify it, delete it, game over. Okay. 3.4, configuration management. I'm not advancing it fast enough here. Okay, so this is about hey, hopefully you have some kind of baseline configuration settings when you deploy a device, whether it is a database, firewall, edge router, whatever. Hopefully you have something that, hey, this is the basic things that you need to harden. Certain services got to be shut off. Certain things, ports got to be closed. Out of the box, a lot of these things are not configured that way, so you have to make sure that you have all these guidance in place already. Security impact analysis. So before you deploy anything, you got to have a technical review of these applications, components, and whatnot to make sure the change will not impact your overall security posture. Access restriction, and then when you configure any kind of devices, you want to make sure, just like a human being, you want to have a least functionality analysis. You only want to assign the least amount of functions to that particular device to do its job. Nothing more, nothing less, right? And you got to make sure you control the user install software. You don't want anybody to kind of go rogue and install whatever they want, right? I got to move a little bit faster. So 3.5, identification and authentication. So this is pretty much very self-explanatory. You got to have a mechanism, whether you implement some kind of role-based access schema or identity automation, whatever. That you need to make sure that you identify these guys. Who are they? Are they who they are? They represent themselves to be, or somebody is impersonating them, right? So that's very important. Passwords, right? Hopefully you have a good password requirements. Not no passwords can be required, or 1, 2, 3, 4 can be a password. So those are the things that pretty much I call IT hygiene that you should have already followed. 3.6, incident response. Again, this is very self-explanatory. You must have good policies and procedures. What do you do when it comes to an incident? Do you have already a chain of commands that you can, follow up, the procedures already in place, training to the people how they can report, how they can deal with incidents? Lately with all the malware, ransomware, hopefully that will be something you absolutely need to deal with in a timely manner, and that must be documented so that people can see it. They don't have to fumble around. They don't have to interpret the way they want to, right? 3.7, maintenance. Again, this is very much you have all these things in place. Now, how are you going forward to maintain all these things, right? Whether they are policies and procedures, whether they are off-site maintenance by another vendor, any kind of diagnostic review that you must do, tools that you need to maintain, keep that up. Don't kind of let it go outdated, because as you can imagine, whatever we're doing right now, probably everything will be obsolete within 3 to 5 years. 3.8, media protection. So as you can imagine, we use a lot of different medias in our work, whether they're USB drives, portable hard drives, or something else, right? So this is something that you need to make sure that you have a good policy in how it's being accessed, how it's being stored, how is it being sanitized when you don't use it, how do you protect it when it's being transported. If you use Iron Mountain, that could be one of the concerns, right? If you have a different site, if you have multiple sites, if you have alternate sites, then you need to make sure that, hey, how are you going to protect it? Encryption would be one way, right? But the other things that you need to make sure you do is, what do you do when this kind of information go beyond your 4 walls? If they're going to be in portable hard drives, portable devices, they're not going to be as easily tracked as if they are stationary sitting on your premise. Going to 3.9, this is about personnel security. So this is, you see what you get here. When people, individuals, human beings, when they have physical access to your site, how are you going to protect that? Are you going to require, people escorting them all the time? Do you have different kind of security clearance for different types of people? So you need to define that very clearly. 3.10, physical protection, very similar to what we talked about 3.9 and 10. So these are the things that, hey, who are the people that can access to, for example, certain areas, auto locks, in place of how you place your CCTV, closed-circuit TV, monitoring different sites. Those are the things you need to look at. And, again, no right or wrong solution, but, again, you need to consider these so that you can see how you can, enhance your safeguard for the CUI. Number 3.11, Risk assessment. So this is the one that, again, very key because you may not have all the resources to protect everything every time. So the risk assessment in our world is very key because that will give you a heat map of where your risks are going to be based on the information you have. So we talked about that earlier, data classification. If you classify your data based on different sensitivity, maybe you have different kind of ways to protect the most sensitive information and maybe less resources to protect the least sensitive information. Yep, you need to do vulnerability assessment. You need to do, when you have these scanning, after you've done external scan, internal scan, pen testing, you may find a lot of vulnerabilities. In our world, as you may or may not be aware, the vulnerabilities may change on a day-to-day basis. Something that are very high, maybe a week ago, maybe low now. Something that are very low, maybe a month ago, could be very high. So one good example, WannaCry, the malware, if you look at it maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it was not a very big risk. But then somebody, I guess, spent a lot of time exploiting it. Then they use it to exploit people. Boom, they became a very high-risk vulnerability. Okay, so this is, again, similar to what we talked about. 3.13 here. Let me advance my thing here. So this is about system and communications protection. So in your business, maybe sometimes it's not applicable to your particular model. When you have to communicate with external parties, when you have to use maybe a software vendor, software development vendor for you, how do you disseminate information? How do you say, these are the basic guidance that you need to follow? Because I'm using you to develop certain code, for example. Those are the things that you need to be aware. How do you, encoding practices, that kind of stuff, how do you securely disseminate that information to these folks? Boundaries you have to establish to make sure that, hey, there are certain things that you have to subnet. There are certain things you need to cocoon. You don't want to share that with a, for example, a flat network, that kind of thing. So this is basically the 14 classes. So one more. There it is. System and information integrity here. So this one here is making sure that you map all the systems and information security requirements to different controls. Okay, so you have to make sure you monitor that and remediate any flaws, identify any kind of, for example, malicious code protection, security alerts, and all the stuff. Update any kind of mechanism to protect against malicious code. Again, it's more, I call it a overall overarching governance about how you deal with security and controls against some of the latest and greatest malware and threats. So that's what the 14 classes are. So one thing you may want to notice is that, well, there are 14 classes. Do they have any ranking among these things? Not really. So there are 14 classes, 110 controls. So when you look at them, hopefully it will give you an idea what you need to do. Why is that important? Because that relates to the NAS 9933, which I'll talk after this polling question. It's kind of like an enhancement of the NIST 800-171. So with that, Emily, polling question number.
Our final polling question. Out of the 14 families of control in NIST 800-171, which ones are the highest risk rated? The first 7 including access control, the last 7 including identification and authentication, none of them, all of them, or I don't know. I'll give everyone a few seconds to make a selection for our last poll here, and once you have completed all CPE requirements, you will be able to download a PDF of your CPE certificate from the certification widget to the right of the slide view. And let's go ahead and take a look at the results. Back to you.
Well, thank you. Yep, you're right, 50% of you folks, all of them. So the good thing and bad thing about the NIST 800-171, if it doesn't rank them, so all of them are important in their eyes. So like I said, even if you don't pass all of them, it's not like the DOD will say, I'm not going to award the contract to you, but you must have a security plan and a remediation plan in place. So that's one thing not so clear about the 800-171. That's a good way to segue into NAS 9933. So this, if you are not aware, came out in December of 2018. It's specifically customized for the A&D industry, because a lot of the breaches actually now the threat actors are targeting A&D industry. So in the past as well, DoD is maybe, I don't know if that's a written rule. They consider the cost, the schedule, the performance of your product. But now they want the cybersecurity to be the fourth requirement pillar of the acquisition process. Again, this verbiage here, I verbatim kind of copied it from the NAS 9933. This is pretty new. It came out only 3 months ago, so probably, as you can imagine, more guidance, more clarification, more elaboration will come out in the next year or so. So the 22 control families, so they reorganize them. I don't have the exact number of controls. It's probably close to 100 of them. They reorganize them into 22 families. Okay, the extension of this is they actually group them into 5 capability levels, risk level, whatever you call it. 1, 2, 3 are nice to have. Maybe 1 is nice to have. 2 is okay, you need it. Number 3 is you should have it because it's good practice. 4 and 5 is you must have it. So in other words, the 4 and 5 is basically you said you gotta absolutely comply with 4 and 5s. The 1, 2, 3 is a next level you need to comply with. Okay. And this one here, if you download the book, is for $60. As you can make, imagine if you make it bigger, you'll see that they actually group all these controls into the 5 capability levels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would imagine in the future when this is more prevalent, this is going to be more enforceable. If you do an independent audit, then we're going to risk rate them because, okay, you meet level 4 and 5, you're good. But any 4 or 5 that you don't meet, immediately that would be a fail. So what does that mean? That means maybe you need to remediate some of these immediately, whereas the 1, 2, 3 categories will be something you need to remediate. But, if you don't, it's not the end of the world. So maybe category 1 is more what I call a blemish. The 2 and 3s is yes, you need to do it, but it's not like you need to do it tomorrow. But the 4 and 5s, you must do it probably within a 1 month period, whereas if you don't do it, probably that would be a deficient environment. Okay, so that's the NAS 9933 as a whole. So right now, the guidance is that from the DoD is a voluntary risk-based cybersecurity standard. Okay, voluntary. The word voluntary, I bolded, I capitalized it because that's what they said. However, as you can imagine, some of the federal government agencies, when they say voluntary, it's like if you don't do it, they'll give you a comment. A lot of frameworks are like that. So keep in mind that you probably want to start looking at 800-171 is a more detailed framework. The NAS 9933 is more a maturity model. You have these things, which ones are more mature based on the levels that you need to, you categorize at 4s and 5s, then you should look at those right away. Okay. Moving on. So this is, again, very much what they are saying, the 2 primary goals of the NAS 9933, and the way they want you to evaluate your cybersecurity profile. They want to measure your cybersecurity risk. So as you can imagine, if you put in that framework and put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they want to see which ones you pass, hopefully all the 4s and 5s, which ones you fail. Then they can kind of maybe have a score quantitatively about your cybersecurity risk. And hopefully this framework will have a lot of commonalities with the other frameworks that, we have in NIST, PCI, HIPAA, whatnot. A lot of these controls are nothing new, by the way. They are very much similar, but there may be certain details, for example, in PCI that you may not see here, and vice versa. Okay, in summary, A&D has a lot of CDI, control defense information, and CUI, control unclassified information, that is targeted by a lot of organizations. 800-171 has been around for a few years. Look at it. You can download it. It's free. The voluntary NAS 9933 just came out in December of 2018. They further categorize them to 1 to 5. Hopefully that makes it easier for you to understand, well, I don't have the resources to do all of them. Which ones first? Look at the 4s and the 5s. It will continue to evolve. So, like I said, this is only, 3 months old. How enforceable is it? Don't know. Who's going to enforce it? Don't know. But I would highly recommend you, regardless of who is going to audit you, who is going to enforce it, you should look at it because the danger is there. Whether you like it or not, there are people who make a living that will try to penetrate your environment to steal your information. So this is for your own good. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Emily, to close it up.
All right, thank you, Francis, and thank you, Mark, for a great presentation today. If you have any questions for Francis or Mark, I know we are right at the top of the hour here. You may either enter your questions in the Q&A box beneath the slide view, or you can reach out to them directly. Their contact info is in the speaker widgets. And as a reminder, if you attended today's presentation in a group and would like to receive CPE credit, you must complete the group attendance sheet found in the slide deck and handouts icon to the right of the slide view. If you participated as an individual and met all certification requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. I'll keep the webcast console open for a few minutes to give you time to download your CPE certificate. A copy will be emailed within 2 weeks should you have any difficulty downloading it now. Here is a link to an online survey where you can provide feedback for today's presentation. Please take a moment to complete this survey as your feedback is very important to us. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you'll join us again next time.